My boss fired me for being honest, so I showed them what dishonesty really looked like. I'd worked at Pinnacle Financial for 3 years when I made the mistake of telling the truth. It started small. During our weekly team meeting, my boss Randolph asked why the Henderson account was behind schedule. Everyone else in that conference room knew exactly why. Randolph had cut our team from 5 people to 3 while doubling our workload. But they all stared at their laptops, suddenly fascinated by their keyboards. The team's overwhelmed, I said simply. We're doing the work of 5 people with 3. Randolph's smile went cold. I see. And you don't think the team is capable of rising to the challenge? We are rising to it, I replied. We're just drowning while we do. The room went silent. After the meeting, my coworker Vera pulled me aside. What are you doing? She whispered. Nobody talks to Randolph like that. I answered his question honestly. That's not how things work here. But I kept being honest. When clients asked about delays, I explained the real reasons instead of feeding them corporate nonsense. When Randolph blamed our department for company-wide issues in the monthly report, I sent HR documentation proving otherwise. When he asked for feedback on his new efficiency program, I told him it was creating more problems than it solved. Each time, Randolph's face got a little redder. His emails to me became shorter and sharper. He started excluding me from meetings, then criticizing me for being out of the loop. The breaking point came during our biggest client presentation of the year. Randolph had promised Westfield Industries that we could deliver their project 2 weeks ahead of schedule. He hadn't consulted the team, he hadn't checked our capacity, he'd just promised because he wanted to look good. 30 minutes before the presentation, he pulled me aside. I need you to confirm the timeline in front of the client, he said. Which timeline? I asked. 2 weeks early, like we discussed. We never discussed that. It's impossible with our current resources. His voice dropped to a hiss. You will confirm that timeline, or you'll be looking for a new job. I stared at him. Westfield Industries would base major business decisions on this timeline. If we failed to deliver, they'd lose millions in delayed product launches. I thought about my mortgage, my car payment, my student loans. I thought about the 3 years I'd invested in this company. Then I thought about the 47 employees at Westfield who would lose their jobs if we caused their product launch to fail. In the conference room, 20 executives sat around a massive oak table. Randolph gave his polished presentation, building to the moment everyone was waiting for. He gestured confidently at his timeline charts, promising revolutionary efficiency improvements. Then he turned to me with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. And our team lead will confirm the delivery schedule. Everyone looked at me. I could feel my career hanging in the balance. Randolph's eyes were burning into me, daring me to defy him. The timeline Mr. Gaines presented is not achievable with our current resources, I said clearly. A realistic completion date would be 3 weeks later than originally planned. The room erupted. Westfield's CEO started asking pointed questions about our project management. Randolph's face went purple as his entire presentation crumbled. After the clients left, he didn't even wait for privacy. You're fired, he said in front of the entire office. Pack your things and get out. As I walked to my desk, the entire floor had gone silent. 43 people pretending to work while watching my humiliation. Vera wouldn't make eye contact. Dalton, who I'd covered for dozens of times, suddenly found his computer screen fascinating. I packed my personal items into a cardboard box. A plant my mom had given me, my coffee mug from my favorite bookstore, a few photos. 3 years of my life reduced to items that fit in a banker's box. But as I cleared out my desk drawers, I found something interesting. A USB drive I'd forgotten about, containing every project file, email chain, and document I'd worked on. 3 years of evidence. What Randolph didn't know was that I'd been systematically documenting his behavior for 8 months. It had started as insurance after he'd thrown me under the bus during the Morrison Project debacle. I'd learned to save everything. Emails, meeting notes, recordings of phone calls where legally permitted. I had a folder on my personal laptop labeled Professional Development that contained enough evidence to end his career. That night, I sat in my apartment with a bottle of wine and my laptop. If Randolph wanted dishonesty, I'd give him a masterclass. I started with the Henderson account he'd asked about in that meeting. I pulled up the original timeline, perfectly reasonable with a 5-person team. Then I found his email to upper management claiming he'd optimized team efficiency by cutting staff. What he'd actually done was increase profit margins by 23% while destroying employee morale and project quality. But that was just the beginning. I dove deeper into the files. What I discovered made my stomach turn. Randolph hadn't just been cutting staff. He'd been systematically lying to clients, cooking project reports, and stealing credit for his team's work. The Morrison project that had won him a promotion, entirely designed by Ingrid, who'd left the company 2 months later, burned out and bitter. Randolph had presented it as his own innovation, even going so far as to submit it for industry awards under his name. I found the email chain where Ingrid had begged him for proper credit. His response was chilling. Team members contribute to my vision. Recognition flows upward in successful organizations. When Ingrid had pushed back, he'd started a campaign of subtle harassment, impossible deadlines, public criticism, exclusion from meetings. Within 6 weeks, she'd given up and submitted her resignation. The efficiency improvements he'd bragged about to the board, they'd actually decreased productivity by 31%, but he'd been manipulating the metrics by excluding incomplete projects from his reports. Any project that ran over deadline simply disappeared from his monthly summaries. I cross-referenced his board presentations with the actual project completion data. The discrepancies were staggering. He'd been presenting a completely fictional version of our department's performance for over 2 years. The client satisfaction scores he'd been boasting about, he'd been pressuring team members to exclude negative feedback and cherry-picking responses. I found emails where he'd explicitly told staff to lose any surveys rating below 4 out of 5 stars. More disturbing were the financial irregularities. Randolph had been padding project budgets and pocketing the difference through a consulting company he'd set up. Small amounts, $2,000 here, $5,000 there, but it added up to nearly $73,000 over 18 months. 3 years of systematic fraud, hidden behind his charming smile and expensive suits. I spent the next 2 weeks building my case. I organized every document, every email, every fabricated report. I created a timeline showing how his lies had escalated over time. I calculated the actual financial impact of his mismanagement, over $2.3 million in delayed projects and lost clients. The Westfield contract alone would have cost the company $890,000 in penalties when we inevitably failed to meet his impossible timeline. But I didn't stop there. I reached out to Ingrid, who'd moved to Seattle and was working for a nonprofit. When I told her what I'd found, she was quiet for a long moment. "He destroyed my confidence," she said finally. "I thought I was terrible at my job. I almost left finance entirely. Your Morrison design was brilliant," I told her, "and I have the original files to prove you created it." She started crying. "I have screenshots of him presenting it as his own work," I continued. "Time-stamped emails showing your original concepts. Everything." "Why are you doing this?" she asked. "Because he's still doing it to other people. And because the truth matters." I contacted others who'd left under Randolph's management. Turned out there was a pattern. Talented employees would join the team, get ground down by impossible demands and credit theft, then leave bitter and convinced they were failures. 8 people total, all with similar stories. There was Garrett, a project manager who'd been blamed for a client's last-minute specification changes. Randolph had screamed at him in front of the entire team, calling him incompetent and unreliable. Garrett had quit 2 days later and spent 6 months in therapy, convinced he was unemployable. Then was Lucia, a brilliant analyst who'd created a risk assessment model that saved the company $340,000. Randolph had presented it to the board as his own innovation. When Lucia confronted him privately, he'd told her that questioning leadership was a career-limiting move. She'd transferred to another department within a month. Each person I spoke with added another piece to the puzzle. They also provided additional evidence: saved emails, recorded conversations, documentation of his harassment and credit theft. Trevor, who'd left 6 months before I was hired, had kept detailed notes about Randolph's fraudulent billing practices. He'd been too afraid to report it at the time, worried about retaliation and legal costs. "I should have spoken up," he told me. "I let him keep hurting people because I was protecting myself." "You were a victim too," I reminded him. "But now we can stop him together." I documented everything and put together a presentation that would make Randolph's corporate slideshow look like a crayon drawing. The evidence was organized into 5 categories: financial fraud, client deception, employee harassment, credit theft, and systematic falsification of reports. Each category included documentation, witness statements, and financial impact analysis. Then I made some phone calls. The first was to Patricia Westfield, CEO of Westfield Industries. "Ms. Westfield, this is about the Pinnacle Financial Project. I was the team lead who spoke honestly about the timeline in your meeting last month." "The one who got fired?" she asked. "That's me. I have information you need to see before you sign that contract." We met at a coffee shop downtown. I brought printed copies of everything: the real timeline analysis, the team capacity reports Randolph had ignored, the historical data showing his pattern of overpromising and underdelivering. Patricia read through the documents, her expression growing darker with each page. "This shows a pattern going back 3 years, she said, flipping through the evidence. "Yes, he's done this to at least 12 other clients, promised impossible timelines, then blamed his team when projects failed." "The Meridian Industries project," she said, recognizing one of the case studies. "We almost hired Pinnacle for that. They failed spectacularly. 6-week delay and a 200% budget overrun," I confirmed. Randolph blamed it on unforeseen market conditions. Actually, he'd committed to a timeline that was mathematically impossible. Patricia read through more examples. "This is fraud," she said flatly. "Yes, it is." "Why are you telling me this? You could have just let us sign and watched your old company fail." I thought about that. "Because your company would fail too, and that's not justice. That's just more casualties." She smiled grimly. "What do you want?" "Nothing from you. I just want you to have accurate information." Patricia pulled out her phone and canceled the contract signing scheduled for the next day. But she did more than that. As CEO of a major corporation, she had connections throughout the industry. Within 48 hours, she'd quietly warned 3 other companies that were considering contracts with Pinnacle. "Corporate responsibility," she told me when she called with an update. "We look out for each other." My second call was to the Securities and Exchange Commission. Financial fraud is a federal offense, and Randolph had been submitting false reports to publicly traded clients. The SEC investigator I spoke with was very interested in the documentation I'd compiled. Agent Martinez was a serious woman in her 40s who'd been investigating corporate fraud for 12 years. When I walked into her office with 3 binders of evidence, her eyes lit up. "This is remarkably thorough," she said, flipping through the timeline I'd created. "Most whistleblowers come to us with suspicions and scattered documents. You've built a complete case." "I wanted to be sure," I told her. "Accusations like this can destroy innocent people if they're wrong." "But you're not wrong, are you?" she asked, studying the financial records. "No, I triple-checked everything. The SEC investigation began within a week. They had the authority to subpoena Pinnacle's records, interview employees, and freeze assets pending review. Agent Martinez called me regularly with updates. "Your documentation saved us months of investigative work," she told me. "We're finding additional irregularities you didn't even know about." Apparently, Randolph's fraud extended beyond my department. He'd been coordinating with the accounting team to hide project overruns and inflate revenue projections for 3 years. My third call was to Pinnacle's board of directors. It took 3 weeks to get a meeting. I walked into that same conference room where I'd been humiliated, carrying a leather briefcase instead of a cardboard box. The board consisted of 7 people, including the CEO. They looked skeptical as I set up my presentation. "You understand this is highly irregular," the CEO said. "Accusations against department heads are usually handled through HR. This goes beyond HR," I replied. "This is about systematic fraud that's exposing the company to massive liability." I started with the numbers: revenue claims versus actual delivery, client satisfaction versus reality, team efficiency versus the human cost. The board members took notes, asked pointed questions, and requested clarification on several data points. These weren't corporate yes-men. They were experienced business leaders who understood the implications of what I was showing them. Then I showed them the pattern: 8 talented employees driven out, credit theft, manipulated metrics. The human cost of Randolph's fraud extended far beyond financial numbers. "This employee," the board chairman said, pointing to Ingrid's documentation, "she won the Morrison Innovation Award last year." "For Randolph," I corrected. "She designed the entire system. He submitted it under his name." The chairman's face darkened. "We gave him a $50,000 bonus for that innovation, and she left the company convinced she was a failure." Finally, I showed them the legal exposure, the SEC investigation, the canceled contracts, the potential lawsuits from clients who'd made business decisions based on false information. "How much exposure are we talking about?" the CEO asked. "Conservatively, $12 million in potential penalties and settlements. That's assuming the SEC doesn't find additional violations. And if they do, the company could face criminal charges for securities fraud. Individual board members could be held personally liable." By the time I finished, the room was dead silent. "How do we know this information is accurate?" the CEO asked. I handed them a USB drive. "Every document is time-stamped and traceable. Email headers, edit histories, original files. I've also compiled statements from former employees willing to testify." The board went into emergency session that afternoon. Randolph was suspended pending investigation within 24 hours. But the board's response went beyond just suspending Randolph. They hired an external auditing firm to review the entire company's practices. They brought in crisis management consultants. They began reaching out to clients proactively to discuss potential issues. 3 days later, I got a call from Pinnacle's CEO. "We'd like to offer you a position," he said. "Department head, with a 40% salary increase and authorization to rebuild the team properly." I almost laughed. "You want me to come back and clean up his mess?" "We want you to come back and do things honestly, like you always did." I considered it. The money was tempting. The vindication would be sweet. "No," I said, "but I'll recommend some excellent candidates, starting with Ingrid Morrison." The CEO was quiet for a moment. "The woman whose work was stolen? She's one of the most talented people I've ever worked with, and she deserves the chance to succeed in an honest environment. Would she come back? Ask her. But be prepared to offer more than money. She needs assurance that this kind of thing will never happen again." Within a week, Pinnacle had offered Ingrid the department head position with a compensation package that included profit sharing and guaranteed credit for her innovations. She accepted, but only after they agreed to implement new policies protecting intellectual property and preventing credit theft. The SEC investigation took 6 months. Randolph was charged with securities fraud, mail fraud, and conspiracy. He pleaded guilty to avoid prison time but was banned from working in finance and ordered to pay $847,000 in restitution. The details that emerged during the investigation were even worse than what I'd discovered. Randolph had been running similar schemes at 2 previous companies. He'd perfected a system of manipulation, fraud, and harassment that had destroyed dozens of careers over 8 years. Agent Martinez called me after the sentencing. "Your evidence was the foundation of this entire case," she told me. "Without your documentation, he would have continued this pattern indefinitely." Pinnacle settled with affected clients for $12.8 million. 8 former employees, including Ingrid, filed a class action lawsuit for workplace harassment and credit theft. They won a $3.4 million settlement, with individual awards ranging from $200,000 to $650,000 based on the damages they'd suffered. Trevor used his settlement to start his own consulting firm. Garrett went back to school and became a licensed therapist, specializing in workplace trauma. Lucia was promoted to senior analyst at her new company and credited with developing innovative risk management protocols. But the most satisfying moment came 9 months after I was fired. I was having lunch downtown when I spotted Randolph across the street. Gone was the expensive suit and confident swagger. He was wearing khakis and a polo shirt, carrying a tablet and looking defeated. He was working as a real estate agent. I watched him try to convince a young couple to look at condos. They seemed unimpressed. After 15 minutes, they walked away, shaking their heads. That's when he noticed me watching. For a moment, we just stared at each other across the busy street. Then he started walking toward me, his face flushed with anger. "You destroyed my life," he said when he reached me. "No," I replied calmly. "You destroyed your own life. I just documented it. I had a family, a mortgage. I lost everything because you couldn't keep your mouth shut. You lost everything because you spent 3 years lying, cheating, and stealing. I just made sure people knew the truth." He opened his mouth to argue, then seemed to deflate. "I was good at my job," he said quietly. "You were good at taking credit for other people's work. There's a difference." "Everyone does it," he said desperately. "Everyone cuts corners, exaggerates results. You act like you're some kind of saint." "I never claimed to be perfect," I told him, "but I never stole credit from my team. I never lied to clients about deliverables. And I never destroyed people's careers to protect my own reputation." He stared at me for a long moment, then walked away without another word. I finished my lunch and went back to my new office. I'd started my own consulting firm 6 months earlier, specializing in project management and team optimization. Ironically, my reputation for brutal honesty had become my biggest selling point. The business had grown beyond my wildest expectations. Companies that had been burned by consultants who overpromised and underdelivered were desperately seeking advisors who would tell them the truth. Vera was my first hire. She'd quit Pinnacle 2 weeks after I was fired, finally fed up with the toxic environment. "I should have backed you up in that meeting," she told me during her interview. "You were protecting yourself," I said. "I understand that. But it was wrong." I offered her the job on the spot. Vera had always been talented, but working under Randolph had made her cautious and insecure. In our honest environment, she flourished. Within 6 months, she was leading client presentations and developing innovative solutions. Dalton reached out 3 months later, asking if I had any openings. I told him I'd consider it if he could explain why he'd abandoned his principles to keep a job working for a fraud. He couldn't. "I was scared," he admitted during our phone call. "I have kids, a mortgage. I couldn't afford to lose my job." "Fear is understandable," I told him, "but you had multiple opportunities to do the right thing. You chose your comfort over other people's careers and well-being. Can't you forgive me?" he asked. "I have forgiven you," I said. "But forgiveness doesn't mean I trust you with responsibility. Character matters in my business." Dalton hung up angry, but 6 months later he called back. "I've been thinking about what you said," he told me. "About character mattering. I want to be better than I was." "What have you done to be better?" I asked. "I reported my new boss for sexual harassment. Cost me a promotion, but I couldn't stay silent again." "Good for you." I also reached out to Lucia to apologize for not supporting her when Randolph was stealing her work. That conversation led to a different kind of job offer. Not a position with my company, but a recommendation to a client who needed someone with Dalton's technical skills and a genuine commitment to ethical behavior. He's been thriving there for 2 years now. Ingrid moved back from Seattle and became my business partner. We now had 22 employees and more clients than we could handle. Every single one of them had hired us specifically because they wanted consultants who would tell them the truth, even when it was uncomfortable. Our company culture was built on radical honesty. We held weekly meetings where anyone could raise concerns about our practices. We had profit sharing that made everyone invested in our success. Most importantly, we had ironclad policies about credit and recognition. Every innovation, every successful project, every creative solution was properly attributed to its creator. Our employees trusted us because we'd proven that doing the right thing was profitable, sustainable, and personally fulfilling. The Westfield Industries CEO became one of our biggest advocates. She'd hired us to audit 3 other vendors after the Pinnacle disaster, and we'd found similar issues with 2 of them. "Honest people are rare in business," she told me. "That makes them valuable." Our work with Westfield led to contracts with 6 other major corporations. Word spread through executive networks that our firm could be trusted to deliver realistic timelines, accurate assessments, and genuine solutions. We weren't the cheapest consultants available, but we were becoming the most sought after. Last month, I got a letter from the SEC thanking me for my cooperation in their investigation. Attached was a check for $50,000, my share of the whistleblower reward. I donated it to a nonprofit that helps workplace harassment victims. The same day, I received a LinkedIn message from someone I didn't recognize. "I'm a former Pinnacle employee who left because of Randolph's management. I heard what you did and wanted to thank you. I was convinced I was terrible at my job. Seeing him get exposed helped me realize the problem wasn't me. I'm thriving at my new company now." There were dozens of similar messages over the following weeks. People who'd been gaslighted and undermined, now finding success elsewhere. That's when I realized the real impact of what I'd done. It wasn't just about punishing Randolph for getting revenge. It was about validating everyone he'd harmed and preventing him from harming others. The ripple effects extended beyond just our industry. 3 of the former Pinnacle employees had started their own companies, building ethical cultures from the ground up. 2 had become consultants specializing in workplace harassment prevention. 1 had written a book about surviving toxic management. Each of them was now in a position to protect others from what they'd experienced. 6 months ago, I was invited to speak at a business ethics conference. The topic was the cost of corporate honesty. "People think honesty is risky," I told the audience of 300 business leaders. "That telling the truth will hurt your career, cost you opportunities, make you enemies." I clicked to my next slide, showing a photo of my thriving company. But dishonesty is infinitely more dangerous. It's a debt that compounds over time. Eventually, the bill comes due, and the interest is devastating. I told them about Randolph, about the employees he'd destroyed, about the clients he'd deceived. "The truth might get you fired," I concluded, "but lies will destroy everything you've built." The response was overwhelming. Business cards, consulting requests, job offers. Apparently, there were a lot of leaders who wanted to build honest organizations but didn't know how. After my presentation, a young woman approached me. She looked nervous. "I think my boss is doing something similar," she said quietly, "manipulating reports, taking credit for my work, but I'm afraid to speak up." I handed her my business card. "Document everything," I told her. "And remember, your integrity is worth more than any job." 3 weeks later, she called me. Her company was under investigation, and she was working with federal regulators to expose a massive accounting fraud. "I kept thinking about what you said," she told me, "about lies destroying everything. I realized I didn't want to be part of that destruction." Her courage had exposed a scheme that would have eventually cost investors $40 million. The early intervention prevented a complete collapse that would have destroyed 200 jobs. That conversation reminded me why I'd spoken up in the first place. Not for revenge, though that had been satisfying. Not for vindication, though that had been healing. I'd spoken up because the truth matters. Because people deserve to make decisions based on accurate information. Because employees deserve to work in environments where competence is rewarded and credit is given fairly. Randolph had created a world built on lies where good people suffered and the truth was seen as a threat. I'd simply exposed that world to sunlight. And in the end, honesty hadn't cost me anything important. It had cost me a job I hated, working for a man I couldn't respect, in a system designed to reward deception. What I'd gained was immeasurable: self-respect, a business built on integrity, the knowledge that I'd helped protect others from the same harm I'd experienced. The financial rewards had been significant too. My consulting firm was generating 3 times the revenue I'd made at Pinnacle. Our reputation for honesty had become our most valuable asset, attracting clients who were tired of being deceived by other consultants. But the personal satisfaction was worth even more than the money. I woke up every morning excited about my work, knowing that I was building something meaningful and sustainable. Last week, I drove past the Pinnacle Financial building. There was a for lease sign in the window. The company had folded 8 months after Randolph's arrest, unable to recover from the scandal and lawsuits. I felt a moment of sadness for the innocent employees who'd lost their jobs. But then I remembered that most of them had found better positions elsewhere, freed from a toxic environment that had been slowly destroying them. Ingrid had helped place 12 former Pinnacle employees in positions at ethical companies. 3 had joined our firm. The others had found roles where their talents were appreciated and their contributions properly recognized. Sometimes telling the truth feels like setting fire to your own life. But if that life is built on lies and compromises, maybe it deserves to burn. I'd shown Randolph what real dishonesty looked like by exposing his 3-year campaign of fraud and manipulation. But more importantly, I'd shown everyone else, including myself, what real honesty was worth. 2 years later, our firm was selected to help design ethical standards for the entire consulting industry. The irony wasn't lost on me. The person who'd been fired for honesty was now helping to institutionalize it. During the standards committee meetings, I met executives from dozens of companies who were struggling with similar issues: toxic managers who destroyed talent, fraudulent reporting that led to catastrophic failures, cultures of fear that punished truth-tellers. How do we change this? One CEO asked during a break. How do we create organizations where people feel safe telling the truth? You start by protecting the people who already do, I told him. Every whistleblower you support sends a message to your entire organization about what you really value. That conversation led to the development of new industry-wide protections for employees who report fraud or harassment. Within 18 months, 3 major corporations had implemented comprehensive ethical reporting systems based on our recommendations. The standards we developed were adopted by over 200 companies, affecting nearly 50,000 employees. Each of those workers now had stronger protections when speaking up about wrongdoing. But perhaps the most meaningful outcome came from an unexpected source. 3 months ago, I received a letter from Randolph's daughter. She was 18 and about to start college. "I wanted you to know that what you did helped our family," she wrote. "When Dad was arrested, I was angry at everyone who destroyed him. But as I learned more about what actually happened, I realized you saved us from living a lie." She went on to explain how Randolph's arrest had forced their family to confront years of manipulation and emotional abuse. "He wasn't just dishonest at work," she wrote. "He was dishonest with us too. The investigation gave my mom the courage to finally leave him. We're happier now, even though we have less money." She was studying business ethics in college and had written her admission essay about the importance of corporate whistleblowers. "I want to build companies where people like you are celebrated, not fired," she concluded. "Thank you for showing me that integrity is worth fighting for." Reading that letter, I realized that the impact of standing up for the truth extended far beyond what I'd ever imagined. It wasn't just about protecting clients or employees or shareholders. It was about building a world where honesty was valued over profit, where character mattered more than convenience. Today, 5 years after I was fired for being honest, I run a company that employs 43 people across 3 offices. We've helped over 300 organizations build more ethical, transparent cultures. Our alumni have gone on to leadership positions where they're implementing the principles we taught them. Most importantly, we've created a model that proves ethical business practices aren't just morally right. They're profitable, sustainable, and personally fulfilling. When young professionals ask me for career advice, I tell them what I wish someone had told me earlier. Your reputation for integrity is your most valuable asset. It takes years to build and seconds to destroy, but once established, it opens doors that money and connections never could. Randolph thought he was showing me the cost of honesty when he fired me in front of the entire office. Instead, he taught me its true value. It was worth everything.